So we're going to talk about in a second around motorsport and the uses in the kind of wider engineering world, but let's just tie it back a second. So you've left university, you've joined Reynard. What was the route to where we are now, I guess? We sit here with KW Motorsport, KW Special Projects, the DMC, which we'll come on to. What was that journey?
Well, I have to, reflecting on it and looking back over now is 20 odd years of career, I was very, very lucky to find my first job with Reynard Motorsport. I mean, it was a really, really interesting place to be. It was a playground for engineers, and I joined the company at a time when it was still growing.
Okay.
Now, I think there were about 60, 70 people when I joined at Reynard, and there were nearly 300 people towards the end of my tenure there. But it was, I progressed through that business very quickly. Started off as a graduate engineer. Right at the bottom, they had a really good training program at Reynard, which basically put you through every department.
Okay.
And you got to learn about how things were made, how things were designed, how things were purchased, how things were put together, how goods in and goods out worked, and the whole part of business. You really learned about the business, and that gave me a good grounding for later in life, as it turns out. But I progressed through it quite quickly. Ended up being chief designer on the Ford Mondeo touring car for BTCC. Had Nigel Mansell driving our cars at one point, Will Hoy and a few others. Went on to Le Mans racing and did a bit of IndyCar racing with Reynard as well. And then sadly for a lot of people, not least Adrian Reynard himself, but sadly Reynard went bust as a result of that economic crisis in America in 2001. And that left me with another crossroads of what to do. Now I'd only had one job up to that point. It's just I'd had lots of different jobs within that same company, but I really had thought for some time it would be good to have my own business, and I'd love to own my own engineering business, but of course I've never really had the confidence to get up and go and do it whilst I had a very good job and was enjoying what I did at Reynard. So Reynard, sort of disappearing kind of left me with that perfect opportunity, I suppose, to go and set up on my own. I mean, on reflection, I consider I probably did it because it was the easiest option, so I was a little bit lazy.
Yeah.
I didn't really want to go and get a proper job, so I made one. I created a job.
Yep.
so I set up KW Motorsport with a colleague of mine, Will Phillips. So we both worked together at Reynard, and Will was working for me as chief designer on a Le Mans car that we were doing, and that Le Mans car needed to be finished as a project, and we kind of knew who the customers were going to be because we knew how it all worked within Reynard. And in fact, it went on to be it was the predecessor to a very successful lineage of Le Mans cars that ended up being the Creation Autosportive car that KW Motorsport designed and built in 2007 onwards. So that was how we got into setting up KWM. It was a bit of a lifestyle business. We didn't want to employ people. We didn't want overheads. We didn't want a building. We didn't want offices. We wanted to keep the cost to a minimum because I'd just seen what had happened at Reynard, where costs got out of control.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the market that you had built that whole infrastructure around disappeared in America and left the company high and dry. So our business model was to keep everything very lean, very flexible and agile. And believe it or not, for younger people out there, we didn't really have any internet then in 2002. We had dial-up internet, but we set our offices up at home. So Will in his office, not far from here in Bicester, and me in my offices over in near Chipping Norton. And we used dial-up internet to communicate with email to our suppliers and our supply chain and our customers, and we designed and built these cars, various Le Mans cars, and had them assembled at our customers' facilities rather than having to have our own facilities. Yeah. So we built this virtual company, and actually now everyone's doing that with the work from home post-COVID. But I'd like to think we were the pioneers of that back in the day then. And of course, it really was before broadband and permanent internet. And so it's funny how things have changed. And that was the start of my ownership of my own businesses and what has now become KW Special Projects.
So that transition then from a motorsport company, which makes sense, it's in your background, into some of the special projects, which I'm sure you tell us about that you've worked on. How did you transition, first of all, from being a motorsport company to a, I guess, non-motorsport company?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's two trains of thought on that. If you look at some of the biggest customer motorsport and motorsport service companies around, ProDrive, McLaren, Williams, they've all ended up setting up advanced engineering departments. I think McLaren might have been the first F1 team to do it, but ProDrive long before that had done it. And even back in Reynard days, we had a special projects division.
Yeah.
I've still got the badge, the nameplate up there. But that was about using the Motorsport technology to solve problems in other sectors. We weren't calling it anything special, but we identified that there were opportunities in composites or aerodynamics. And in fact, back in the late 90s, when I was relatively young at Reynard, I worked on a project with Virgin Atlantic, which was designing a first-class airline seat.
Okay.
For an upper-class airline seat for Virgin, and it was a seat that went into a lie-flat bed.
Yeah.
And the USP, the bit that made that all possible, was composites and lightweighting. And that's technology transfer, and now we're calling it horizontal innovation, where we're taking technologies that are normally in silos of industry,
yeah.
and we're saying, well, where are the horizontals that you can actually cut through those sectors and say, well, actually composites fits in aerospace, automotive, motorsport, maybe even medical, certainly performance sports. And we built a business on that, and that's special projects. But there are others that have done it as well. But I think some people have done it as a deliberate commercial exploitation of what they've got, and through necessity of trying to diversify. I did it because I actually enjoy engineering, and motorsport, although it was an interest, it wasn't my only passion. I guess the motorsport bit happened because I liked engineering.
Yeah.
Not that I loved motorsport. I'm a failed racing driver and thought, what else can I do to work in that sector? So I think naturally, and because I'd done it at Reynard with various projects, naturally we started to sort of gravitate to other sectors and other industries where we solve problems. And I guess the whole KWSP thing happened again a bit like one of those junctions in life, and a bit of serendipity, where one of our motorsport customers, who I was at the track with, and we'd built a race car for, and we were track supporting him throughout a season. It was about halfway through the season where he said, well, do you know what, I've got some engineering problems at work that you might be able to help with. I've looked at what you do on our race cars, and it's not a lot different to the problems that we've got with some of our machinery and engineering activities at work. Could you come and have a look? And so his whole industry was completely different to ours, and that's where he'd made his money, and he was now spending his money in motorsport. And so I went and had a look, and sure enough, I identified that we could probably solve some of their specific problems with composites as a lightweighting solution. So they were building machines that were incredibly heavy, made out of quite agricultural materials, aluminium, slab metal, and suffered as a result from stiffness, weight, thermal expansion issues.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that we could probably solve quite a lot of those with composites, which was a material we knew really, really well, but they knew nothing about. So that was a perfect marriage. We had the skills to solve that problem that they would not have identified without Motorsport being the developer of it. And we ended up building a really strong relationship with that business, and ended up having to set up a company in order to service that industry, and that was Special Projects.
And do you think there's motorsport traditionally, I've seen it numerous times where, as you said, leads into other projects, there's a lot of transferable horizontal innovation. Do you think that's because there's a push within motorsport and automotive then indirectly to have marginal gains and to improve performance, that maybe there isn't that drive in aerospace or others where there isn't a maybe commercial sporting entity to it as well?
Well, I mean, there's two things. Firstly, we shouldn't assume that the technology transfer is one directional.
Yep.
There are a number of cases where, and of course now, having said that, I can't think of a single example, but there are a number of cases. There may just be quality standards or methodologies or procurement teams or something where big industry process has transferred back to motorsport.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, the common or flow of technology transfer is from motorsport into other sectors, and historically always been automotive. Race on Sunday, win on Sunday, sell on Monday was the philosophy of Formula One. But the reason it happens in motorsport is because, yes, there's slightly bigger budgets, but I think because the races happen so regularly, you have very strict deadlines and targets to achieve. It's incremental, so even if you don't do so well at the last race, you're trying again for the next one. Your development cycles are much shorter. But the budgets help, because it means that you can invest a bit more in things that are solely for the purpose of getting performance. And also, I think the attitude to risk is very different. The risk profile is different, so you can take a different attitude to how you treat that risk, and so you can do lots and lots of development, expecting perhaps only 1 in 10 things to work. Whereas, of course, when you get on an aeroplane, you don't want only 1 in 10 of them to fly. You want them all to fly. So there are very different risk profiles, and if you can adopt that risk profile and work to your advantage and say, I'm going to use that for my R&D lab, but also I'm winning races and getting world championships, and there's also other benefits, then transferring that technology across to other sectors is natural and beneficial. And it may only be a tenuous link. I mean, people complain that perhaps Audi didn't really develop, direct injection engines that you see in your car, but of course it did. There was something that came from that opportunity of development. But it goes into performance sports as well. You're sitting next to a Boardman bike there. That the technologies that we're developing in aerodynamics for wind tunnel testing years ago for Formula One is now transferring across to sports and getting marginal gains in the sporting industry.
Where else do you think there is horizontal innovation, or be it automotive outwards or into automotive? Do you think there's anything else that's on the horizon?
It's across the board. It's across the board. I mean, for me, the interesting sector at the moment, the one that I'm really excited about is space. For me, it's almost like the new motorsport. Motorsport's got a little bit dull. I mean, we still do quite a bit of stuff in Formula One, as you know, and a bit in endurance racing. But the problem it's become a one-make series in just about every category, whether it's IndyCar or even BTCC has now got standardisation of parts and cost driving down, and that's sort of hindered the development and the excitement in the engineering that you can put into it. And there's been quite a lot of restrictions in what you can do and what you can develop. Space is the new frontier, quite literally. There's now a lot of private space industry developing around communications and satellites and sort of regular orbiting objects that are going out there. So it's low volume, it's high value, it's super exciting and interesting area. So I'm really interested in space, and it has the same problems as motorsport. So you're after lightweighting, you're after reliability, but your risk profile again is different because you're not necessarily putting people up there on satellites, you're putting communications up there. So that's interesting, but it can go across everything. Medical, we've been involved in medical sector. The automotive one is obvious. It's not just the technology either, it can also be philosophy and project management tools. And everyone's seen it during COVID with the whole ventilator challenge. There was a lot of motorsport companies got involved in that, and the reason was their attitude to their work ethic, frankly. They were prepared to work all-nighters and 100-hour weeks because that's what they do to try and achieve a race win.
Race finishes.
And so it was getting things done on time. It was about teamwork, and I think actually anybody that was involved in that will tell you that they enjoyed that as much as they enjoyed getting ready for a race.
Is that challenge and
it's the challenge.
Objective there to hit. Do you think there needs to be more from general engineering companies in terms of that speed and wanting to sometimes get a product to market rather than it being the perfect product?
It depends, doesn't it? Because it's not the answer for everything.
No.
There are some industries and some products where, as I mentioned, aerospace, where you don't want people to cut corners and take those higher risks. So it's got to be appropriate. And I think that's the same with anything. You've got to choose the appropriate solution. We're talking about additive manufacturing later, and additive manufacturing isn't the solution for everything. It's an appropriate solution where the problem that you need to solve requires something like additive. If you can still make it with casting or injection molding, it's going to be cheaper and quicker.
Yeah.